Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honor to rise at this hour to speak on this important take-note debate. I feel compelled to start with the sad news that was originally shared earlier tonight by the member for Similkameen-Nicola, that the Honourable John Fraser, former Speaker of the House, former Member of Parliament, and a valiant conservation champion. He served as Minister of the Environment in the government of the Right Honourable Joe Clark. He served as Minister for Fisheries. He was a British Columbian, a progressive conservative, a very close friend, and he died a few days ago, and we have flowers in the hallway outside under his portrait. And when we talk about British Columbia forests, and we talk about the softwood lumber disputes, over many years, John was very involved in advocating for the protection of our forests. He played a key role, as I mentioned, on the floor of this place just not that long ago with the Right Honourable Brian Mulroney, in getting the logging of the old-growth forests, the forests of what is now Guayahanas National Park. Played a key role in that, even as Speaker of the House. I remember, I'll just briefly reflect that he, in the center block speakers' chambers with a number of visiting conservationists and First Nations, proposed a toast to, and I'll quote him, to the conspiracy to save the planet. It was a nonpartisan conspiracy with progressive conservatives, with liberals, New Democrats, and members of the bloc all working together. And so, in his memory, I just want to dedicate this reflection on the state of our forests, of the ongoing softwood lumber disputes, and just say how dearly he will be missed. He was 92 years old when he passed, but there's no stronger environmentalist in the history of this country than the Honourable John Fraser. Well, as this brief remark and reflection might suggest, I've been following the softwood lumber dispute for some time. Written much about it over the years. I mean, going back to what some Canadians will remember in the 1980s, it sounded like some kind of awful disease that we had to deal with shakes and shingles. But it wasn't a joke. We have had relentless opposition from the U.S. to a fair shake for the Canadian forest industry. It's been, as has been reflected by a very active participant in tonight's debate, my friend from Courtenay, Alberni, who's reflected on the fact that this is 42 years of being somehow unable to resolve what appears to be a long-running and bad soap opera. We've had moments of clarity and moments that fell apart. I certainly think that the current Minister of Trade could be far more active in making this a top priority issue when dealing with the United States. But I also think it's unfair to suggest that nothing's been done by the current government on trade disputes, because I think it is quite remarkable that, and again with the late Brian Mulroney's help, that the current government was able to get to any trade agreement with the former administration of former President. Let's hope to God we can continue to refer to him always as the former President, Donald Trump, who is at his essence protectionist, isn't really interested in liberalized trade or fair trading rules, or even in the global trade regime, of which I also have many criticisms. It's close to a miracle that we have CUSMA, and that we were able to actually improve on the agreement by getting rid of Chapter 11 and the investor-state dispute resolution processes, and improve on the energy chapter, but we were not able to improve on this perennial crisis of softwood lumber. We know that the deal that we had, which bought us some time, and bought us quite a lot of time in 2006, but at a cost, because it, I should pause here again, Madam Speaker. There really, in a take-note debate, is no such thing as a prize for best line of the night. So let this be a first. But I'd like to present, I wish I had something, if I had anything, it would be a prop, but I wouldn't be allowed to use it. I wish I had a trophy for the honourable member for Courtney Alberni for Tax the Axe. It should go down in history, but malheureusement, je pense que comme...
Unfortunately, as my BQ colleague said, there's not a great translation for Tax the Axe. It's a good joke, but...
hats off to the member for Courtney Alberni. Wish I'd thought of it, but, you know, there you go. Credit where credit's due. We didn't really protect our forest industry in the deal that bought time in 2006, and once it expired in 2015, we've had nothing in place instead. We keep winning. Let's be clear. We win in the World Trade Organization. We win before NAFTA panels. And the efforts of the U.S. Department of Commerce in saying that our industry is somehow unfair to the U.S. industry, those arguments and a fact-based approach in response. We win in the courts, but the U.S. Department of Commerce is a domestic and political organization. And again, if I was giving a prize, I mean, champion lobbyists, again, the U.S. Lumber Coalition, are able to come back over and over and over again. So tonight, when we have a take-note debate, and again, I'm backing up for credit where credit's due to the honourable member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte. Thank you, merci pour l'effort.
Thank you for the efforts for your February 5th efforts. Thank you to the member for Saint-Hyacinthe-Bagotte for trying to have an emergency debate.
In early February of this year, to have an emergency debate when the U.S. Department of Commerce said, oh, guess what? The duties we've been applying at about 8.05% are going to go up to 13.86%. And that's just what we're doing, and we don't have to have a reason. You know, it's often the case that I look at the United States of America and say, yeah, Barack Obama isn't George Bush, and George Bush isn't Donald Trump, but the United States of America is the United States of America, and they just keep doing what they do, and it isn't fair and it isn't right, and Canada should be able to do something more, although it's not nothing to go back to another international tribunal, as our government is doing, complain of the unfairness of the situation, that it's not right to keep hiking duties. So focusing on solutions, and we've heard quite a few tonight. Let's look at the solution that was originally put forward in the block request for an emergency debate. In this budget coming up April 16th, let's put some money forward so that Canadian industries that are being unfairly impacted by this can receive some compensation from our government, and we'll eventually try to get it out of the U.S. some other way to keep our industry afloat and keep it whole. The amount of U.S. structural lumber going into the U.S. has been going up steadily. I think that's why they're raising the tariffs. Over the last couple of years and the explosion in demand for construction materials, we're getting more of the pie for Canada than we did, say, even 5-6 years ago. This is why American manufacturers and the lumber group is upset about it and looking for more duties to hit us hard. What else could we do? We could make sure that Canadian structural lumber is used more in Canada. We could stop raw log exports, because that does require a federal permit. We could make sure that our mills in Canada are not lacking for fiber supply to keep our workers going on triple shifts 7 days a week if they want to. Shipping out raw logs is wrong. Recently in Dubai at COP28, all the countries on earth essentially embraced something that I don't think has been spoken of in this House. It's called, quote unquote, a circular economy. The idea being that the rip and strip idea, which is exemplified by logging in places that need to be protected, particularly old growth forests, let's just rip and strip and get that out and ship it someplace else and not create the jobs here. If we're serious about raising Canadian productivity, we want a circular economy. If we're serious, in the 20 seconds I have left, Madam Speaker, I know we could stop raw log exports and make sure we take better care of the ecological health of our forests while also protecting our workers. And lastly, we do need to act on the climate crisis, because the biggest threat to our forests isn't the U.S. Lumber Association, the Lumber Coalition. It's the climate crisis. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
The honourable member didn't have those 20 seconds, but I'm glad I gave them questions and comments. The honourable parliamentary secretary.
Madam Speaker, through you, I'd like to thank the member opposite for that very informative speech. Madam Speaker, through you, I'd like to ask the member, today we heard about this wonderful deal during the Harper era that was signed and really hurt the industry, hurt jobs across the sector for 7 straight years. It imposed an export tax on producers from 5 to 15%. Would the member opposite think that's a fair approach? And what does the member opposite think in terms of what the Conservatives are doing in terms of protecting our environment and fighting climate change? Because we do know we need to protect the forest industry, but we also need to protect our environment.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
I thank the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, because whether he intended to or not, he did allow me to sneak in something I ran out of time to mention, which is that the forest industry quite neatly overlays rural and remote areas of Canada and a lot of Indigenous territories and a lot of Indigenous communities. So yes, we need to do a better job protecting our forests. The forest industry in Canada, despite their press, is not perfect. It could do a better job on its environmental performance. We could sequester more carbon in our forests. And again, what I think of the Conservatives' lack of policy on climate is a long speech of nothing, but I'm afraid if I told the Liberal member what I thought of the Liberal climate policies, he wouldn't be very pleased either. So I'll end it there, Madam Speaker.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments? The
honourable member for Kootenay-Albany. Columbia. Yes.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just a quick question on talking forestry management, which, of course, in British Columbia is a significant question today. I've been talking with the, provincial party on forestry management, because it, of course, affects all of our forestry industry. Would you agree that? Would you agree, Madam Speaker, that perhaps a solution that has not been used and should be is all of our small, especially very small generational sawmills, like 4, 5, 6 generations, those people who work in those sawmills, they know forestry management better than anyone, because they are there to make sure that their families can then take over the businesses, and it's been going for years. So they understand forestry management, yet they're not brought to the table. So I'm wondering if you think that that's something that could be explored to help us with forestry management.
The honourable member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, the Honourable Member for Kootenay-Columbia. There's no question that we in this country tend to have a default preference for people who describe themselves as professionals as opposed to people who actually know what they're doing. I've always liked the quote that amateurs built the Ark and professionals built the Titanic. I do think we should bring to the table people who have intergenerational experience in managing their own lands, thinking to the 7 generations and not thinking only of rip and strip.
Questions et commentaires.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Abitibi Bay James. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank my colleague for her speech. I'd like to hear what she thinks about the fact that our forests are not protected enough. Does she think the government should support the sector financially rather than eclipsing it? And also, why is the U.S. Department playing such an enormous role? Thank you, Madam Chair. I completely agree. We need subsidies that favor the Canadian industry in this era of punishment from the American government. It would be a good idea for the Canadian federal government to give a monetary compensation to this industry and at the same time better protect Canadian forests, boreal forests. in conjunction with the Indigenous peoples and the United Nations in the future.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I was just reading a quote from the release for ISCOM Investments, the new consortium in the coast of BC of Indigenous companies. And I was reading a quote from Wamish, Ken Watts. He's the elected Chief Councillor of Sashat Nation. He says, as First Nations decision makers and leaders, it is our responsibility to help find positive and productive solutions and be proactive in our efforts to solve the complex problems that society faces. And I want to thank my colleague, because that's what she's done tonight. And also, he cited, through the shared values of our consortium, it is our goal to demonstrate how businesses can work with First Nations and facilitate this change with new ways of thinking. Our nations have made a commitment to bring our paddles into the same canoe, together paddling as one as we move forward to exploratory opportunities. And Madam Speaker, what I'd really like us to learn from Chief Watts from Wamish is, can we do that here? Can we get ourselves in the same canoe and start paddling in the same direction? Because 42 years of going back and forth like this, it's not working, Madam Speaker. It's failing everybody. And you know, the government could invest or expand the Natural Resource Canada program, which really helped Indigenous communities. But maybe my colleague could speak about the importance of Indigenous ownership when it comes to forestry companies in Canada, and Indigenous knowledge, and the importance of that. And I want to thank my colleague for her speech and for tonight trying to force that debate and open up, talking about solutions to deal with these problems that are facing us right now.
Member for Saanich Gulf Highlands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thanks to my friend from Courtenay, Columbia. Look, the issue of forestry and between the Canada-U.S. debate is structural. Let's recognize that. Most of our forests and forest products are produced off land that is called Crown land. And in the U.S., it's on private land. And the stumpage fees we charge are viewed by the U.S. as being an unfair subsidy. Let's strip all that away. It's Indigenous land. We want to call it private land? Who did you steal it from? If you want to call it Crown land, where did we stake it from? What if we focus our efforts around forests on justice and reconciliation and land back and economic value and thinking to the 7 generations around projects like the one that my friend from Courtenay, Alberni just mentioned, and Chief Watts' impact there. We also need to re-examine our Constitution, because it's widely assumed that because in 1867 someone wrote down that provinces are in charge of forestry, that the feds have very little to do with it. Let's back up and say in 1867 we weren't talking about climate change, we weren't talking about Indigenous rights. Yes, forests, in terms of your annual allowable cut, your logging allowances, that's clearly provincial. But the federal government has a much bigger role here for biodiversity protection, for reconciliation, and for climate action. So let's take off our 1867 blinkers and figure out how we get everybody in the same canoe.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member Abitibi-Temiskaming. Thank you, Madam Chair. I heard a pun from my colleague. I don't think whether my colleague was saying this on purpose. She said an environmental measure that's been proven and works with the carbon tax. And countless times here in this chamber we hear axe the tax. It's as if this is a reversal. We're saying tax the axe. Stop taxing the axe. The axe is, of course, what our forest producers use when working in the forest industry. Should this not be a priority for this government? Instead of claiming axe the tax, let's stop taxing the axe, because investing in the forest is investing in the planet as well, and in durable, sustainable measures. I almost have nothing to add, because I completely agree with my Bloc colleague. It's also important, however, that when we have debates here in the House on the carbon price, it's almost useless to have this debate when we have this fundamental question, the biggest threat possible of climate change. there's only nuclear war that is a bigger threat. We should have science-based debates, talk about evidence, and talk about the reality of our situation, which is so serious for our children and for our grandchildren.
Reprise du débat.
Resuming debate.